And now allow me to introduce your first speaker here at the pink stage. Lucas da Costa is the founder of ergomake. He's a software engineer, published author, and professional problem solver. He's passionate about open source and has written a book called Testing JavaScript Applications, and his blog often appears on the front page of Hacker News. Although he works with JavaScript most of the time, after living in London for 5 years, Lucas now prefers tea. The title of his talk is Designing Staging Environments, a Blueprint for Pre-Production. Please give a warm welcome to Lucas da Costa.
Thank you. Thanks. Thanks, everyone. Great to be here today. I apologize for the bit of coughing I'll do, because I was really sick last week. I'm good now. So yeah, let's talk a bit about how to design staging environments, because this is something people usually have trouble with. So if you've had trouble with your pre-production environment before, sometimes called staging, please raise your hands. Okay, good. So that's why everyone came here today. Pretty much everyone has had problems. So who am I? Well, I'm the founder of ergomake. This is exactly what we work with. We work with pre-production environments, and we've seen all types of setups in the wild. So I'm happy to talk you through your particular setup. I'm happy to help you set up in-house solutions, whatever it is that you're building. Very happy to help with that. But if you're looking for something ready-made, we have it as well. Before, I've written Testing JavaScript Applications. That's a book published by Manning, because I've done a lot of work on Chai.js and Sino.js. Does anyone know those here? Okay, a few people. Good. Contributed to plenty of other open source projects, including Jest, which is also a big one. And I was previously working as a senior software engineer at Elastic before founding ergomake. So let's talk about why this matter. Well, everyone here raised their hands when I asked them whether they had problems with staging, so I think everyone knows why this matter. But it's always good to reiterate. So why do we use staging today? Well, today, we usually use staging for these three main purposes. First one is development. Many times, people cannot run their whole software on their machines. Maybe they have a bazillion services. Maybe they have different databases, or they have Kafka, or they're running things on JVM, which is usually have enough for you not to be able to run the whole thing on your machine if you have plenty of services. So what many people do is they run only a tiny service on their machine, usually a front end or something, and then they point that to staging, which, as you probably know, given you've raised your hands before, causes lots of problems. If you have, for example, a queue, and you're testing putting messages into the queue and processing them, guess what happens if there's someone else using staging at the same time? Or if just there is a worker in staging picking up messages from those queues, you're not going to be able to do whatever you need. So development is the first reason why we usually use staging, and a big source of problems. Second one is testing. So people do all sorts of testing and staging. Sometimes you have QA folks, they're using staging to validate do actual acceptance testing, validate requirements and that kind of stuff. Designers sometimes use it to validate whatever it is that you're building, which to see if it conforms to their designs or it doesn't. And some other folks, they also run load testing, they run synthetics tests, they do lots of different types of testing against these pre-production environments, which I'm calling staging here, okay? And final one is validation, so that's again, another kind of testing, so more from a non-technical perspective, as I mentioned before. And usually it happens because these folks, QA, designers, and product managers, they usually cannot run the apps on their machines because they're not technical. So if you're asking them to clone a Git repo, run a bunch of scripts, set things up, well, usually devs, they suffer with that, so why would a non-technical person not suffer as well, right? So what is the business impact of staging? Well, first one, making sure that feature match specs, because let's say you as a developer, you've done something, and now, well, you think you followed all those beautiful Figma screens, you think you've done everything right, but actually you forgot a very, very important animation which increases conversion by, I don't know, 30% according to studies. Well, if you ship something that doesn't have that to production, let's say you merge that to main, now main is broken, you cannot deploy main, and there goes your continuous deployment strategy. So ensuring features match specs, also from a non-technical perspective, is important to avoid breaking main. The other thing is to do more representative testing, more reliable software. This is where many of you may have seen people saying, we need to make staging just like production. And then you miserably fail at that, just like everyone else does, because it's pretty much impossible, and I have a strategy to work around that, as you see today. And finally, sharing context among these non-technical team members, because as I've mentioned before, these folks, they cannot run things on your machine, and we must be sympathetical to their needs. But there are better ways to get these things than what we currently do. What we currently do, as you've seen, as you've raised your hands, once again saying about that, we can do that in a better way. So let's talk through what are the current challenges with pre-production environments and how we can solve them today. So here's a picture that includes pretty much all of today's challenges. So on one side, we have the technical stakeholders, the developers, the architects, engineers, whatever titles people use these days. And here on this other side, we have the non-technical stakeholders, the designer, the QA, and the PM. So the first challenge we usually see is technical complexity. So for you to even have a pre-production environment, you need to set up all the infrastructure to do that. And if you're trying to replicate things, just like try to have staging just like production, you're probably going to have to use these folks here. Helm, Kubernetes, Terraform, CloudFormation, Argo. You're going to have a lot of complexity that devs don't always understand, because even though we've been talking a lot about DevOps, developers need to understand the infrastructure on which things run and all that. Well, we're not quite there yet, because we keep adding complexity to the stack, so it's pretty much difficult to keep up with all that. So technical complexity is something that gates developers from being able to fully own their pre-production environment. Then, operations dependency. If you work at a big co, you've probably seen this. You need something done, you need an environment to test something, or you need changes done to the infrastructure. Guess what? You don't have access. Now you need to open a ticket to support and wait a few hours in a good day, maybe 1 or 2 days, so you can get whatever you need done. Because, okay, we talk a lot about DevOps, let's own the infrastructure. At the end of the day, especially because you need to have some kind of access control, so that's another problem. Apologies. So this complexity leads to this problem of depending on ops, also gauging the control, and that's yet another problems we've seen. Another problem is that staging is a single point of failure. So especially in the case where people rely on staging to be able to do development, in the case where developers need to point to staging to use queues or databases or whatever, I've heard stories of people that had a team of like 90, 100 developers. They couldn't run their 20, 30 services on their machines. And then what happened was, one beautiful day, staging broke, and they took 3 to 4 days to fix it. And folks couldn't do things properly, and then they generated this huge batch that they had to merge, to merge all at once in main, that generated all sorts of problems because people were simply depending on staging. So that might not be our case, but trust me, I've seen lots of weird things happen because people had a single staging environment. So do not do this, right? And this happens for many reasons. So one of the reasons this happens is that essentially people want to make staging really representative of production. They say, oh, it needs to be just like production. We'll catch all the bugs before they get there. It doesn't happen. And all you end up is with the same bugs that you'd had anyway. You'll probably have fewer of those. That's granted. You definitely catch more bugs. That's definitely true. You definitely share some context. But you end up with a very expensive pre-production environment, and therefore you can only have one, because folks will not allow you to spend a lot of money on this. Okay? Another problem, lack of visibility. This is a big one, and this is the main problem we see at ergomake that we try to solve. That thing I mentioned, when designers really need something shipped in a very particular way, or a product manager needs a feature to behave in a very particular way for you to be able to get customers or do whatever, it's very problematic for those folks to only see it when it gets to staging, because by the time it gets there, you as a developer have already developed everything, have already opened the pull request, wrote the description, someone else stopped whatever they're doing to look at your code, they probably cloned your Git repo, probably run it on their machines, Sometimes people are lazy. They don't always do that. I've had a lot of developers confess to me they don't get to actually testing things manually, so we help with that. Then they give you the review, you fix the changes, they go through all that again. Sometimes they clone the repo again, very often they don't. And then you merge it. Then let's say you're in a good scenario, you merge it, you get it deployed to staging automatically because you have all the CI pipelines configured. Great. Now, these non-technical folks, they go there, the designer, the PM, they go there, they see it, and they're like, oh, this is not what I wanted. I'm sorry, but we're going to have to redo it. Now, you have to run to main, you get a git revert it, or you need to patch it, or do whatever so it doesn't get to production. And now you've got a broken main. And then you need to go, clone everything, open a new pull request, go through the review process again, get more reviews, merge it, and guess what? These folks, they're only going to see it again once it gets to staging, unless you want to talk to them and get them in a Zoom call and share your screen, which also happens very often. So deploying things late, having a single pre-production environment also makes changes expensive because you take way more time to do it. Another problem, messy data, making things difficult to test. So if you have, raise your hands if you have a pre-production environment. Okay, now keep your hands up if your pre-production environment uses a database that's not cleaned up before deployments. It's always the same database with the same data. Okay, almost everyone that raised their hands before. That causes all sorts of problems because you're going to get messier and messier data every time people do testing. I've seen lots of environments with like test 1, test 2, test 3, test 9, and a bunch of messy data. Sometimes there's even buggy data there because let's say you introduce the bug. You as a developer introduce the bug, which causes data problems. It gets to pre-production, and then someone uses the software and saves buggy data to your database. You don't have the right constraints or whatever because you didn't intend this to happen. This would never happen in production. This type of buggy data would never be there. Then, well, next time you deploy something, things may go wrong. Or in the future, months and months later, something will go wrong because you have data you would never have had in production. And sure, you can have constraints and you can avoid this in a way, but it happens very often. And the data just gets messier and messier, which makes things very difficult for QA to test. Cool. And the next thing is non-deterministic validations. So essentially because these folks are validating things at different orders all the time, especially when you have a single environment and you're deploying there before you actually merge the code, people end up in scenarios where they have this Slack channel and then they're like, hey, I'm going to use staging for 10 minutes, okay? And then people say, oh, sure. And then they end up using staging for 15 minutes. And then in those extra 5, someone has deployed something else and broke everything. This happens very, very often. Having Slack channels to coordinate who's going to use staging is also something we've seen quite frequently. Does anyone do that here? See? Okay, so that's not good. All right, so how do we solve these things? Well, we can summarize all of this in 2 main categories. First thing is shifting left on this side. Sorry, let me just get some water. So by shifting left, I mean getting these folks on this side and putting them towards the left of your process, towards the code review part. So if you're able to have these folks reviewing, you avoid merging broken code, you avoid going through multiple cycles of reviews and giving devs more and more work for them to do, and for devs to do as well. So shifting left on the side is one big way to do that. And the other way to do that is to remove complexity on this side so that these folks can actually own whatever they're doing. Now, first thing I'd recommend folks to do is to eliminate the bottleneck. So if you have a single huge environment, that's going to cause all of those problems we've talked about before. So if you're able to have smaller pre-production environments that you can share with these folks, that solves lots and lots of problems. By doing this, let's say you're able to have your developers using different environments each for different changes. So this is not per developer, okay? This is ideally per change. So developer A does something, they deploy to this pre-production environment, Now designer has somewhere to see it before things get merged, and they're sure that whatever developer B did, it didn't interfere with developer A. And then sure, you can still have your pre-prod with everything from main, but it can be just another one of those small environments. And these folks, they can just see it right before you merge. And if you have, like, let's say, a bot that keeps updating her branch on top of whatever is on main, you can guarantee that these folks here, they're always going to be up to date with these changes. So when the designer sees it, if they're the last one that needs to approve the PR, they're going to see it, they're going to approve it, they're going to see the exact same thing that you're going to deploy, and then fine, they can move on and test environment B from developer B, and all that. QA also gets a clean environment, because all of these, they have different databases with whatever schema those changes depend on. So let's say developer B was working on a migration. Developer B does the migration. That migration would break developer A if they were using the same environment. So if you're on the team of folks that uses Slack to coordinate changes, what if developer B deploys their migration thing first? What does developer A have to do? Do they have to roll it back to be able to use it, and then you keep rolling back and forth things? What if you're deleting a row and you're losing data? What happens, right? So this also solves the problem of messy data. And finally, the PM gets visibility on when it needs to be done, where things are, and they can also approve things. So enabling developers to spin up these environments at will is super, super important. So I highly recommend that. So one of the ways to do this is with Vercel. So if you use Vercel, they give you this pretty much for free in terms of work. So they're pretty great. Sometimes you do have databases. One thing that we've seen is if you have databases, you're probably going to have problems with this because they will only deploy your application if you need Kafka or workers in another language. If you have a larger service, might not work. What we do is basically allow you to have your API or database wherever you want in your Docker Compose file, which is a file you probably already have. So if you just commit that to Git, we can also give you those preview environments, and we can spin up dev from your machine as well. But you don't need to use these. Some people build these in-house if they have very specific infrastructure that other tools don't cover. But I'd highly, highly recommend to look either at us Vercel, even a competitor, because it's just a lot of work. If you're building this in-house, when we started building this, we were seeing people hiring DevOps engineers, spending a lot of money to hire those folks, and then writing complex CI pipelines, writing all the things to do the migrations, the staging, and all of that. And it was just very, very complex. So if you do decide to do this, just be careful with these things. Sharing databases, please don't. Big, big problem. Sharing queues, that's even worse. Because if you're sharing database, fine, you're going to end up with messy data, but Postgres is good, ACID, all of those good things. They're going to prevent you from doing, from getting many problems. But if you're sharing queues, you don't know who's going to get the queue. You don't know if it's your worker, if it's staging's worker, if it's someone else's worker. And then you're going to end up with all sorts of weird scenarios, and you won't know, is it a bug I've introduced? Is it a bug someone else introduced? Is it an actual bug, even? So this is very bad. And pointing to staging services, also don't do that, because then you're centralizing anyway, so what's the point? Okay, except staging static things. So if you have a server with a bunch of videos, they never change, fine. Images, large files, whatever. That's probably okay. Things you should probably do. Bring non-technical stakeholders into GitHub and GitLab. Because if these folks can see the pull request and participate on the review, you don't need to be pinging them. They can find whatever time works best for them. They can leave the reviews written on the pull request, so you know what they asked, whether that bug is caused by something else. So if a designer comments, oh, you've forgotten this thing that I've done on Figma, someone else can go and say, oh, it's because this Boolean is wrong here. So bringing everyone into GitHub, GitLab helps with the overall flow and with managing those comments. We've seen quite often people just sharing links on Slack for their pre-production environments, which is also fine. But if you bring everyone to GitHub, that's just way easier for everyone. Use the same review process for them, as I've mentioned, and explicitly define from whom you need input. Sometimes not all of these folks need to give input. If you're just doing like a migration and it doesn't have any proper visual changes, maybe only QA needs to see it, for example. So another way to do this, if you're doing this in-house, you should just use Terraform, ArgoCG, CloudFormation, whatever. The problem with this is that it usually makes things complex. And if production is too large, staging will be too expensive, and therefore, guess what? You will not get staging. If you have too many resources, it will take quite some time to spin up environments. So I don't know if you've used Terraform before, but it tends not to be quite fast, depending on how how complex your infrastructure is. So it probably takes quite some time to spin up these environments if you have a complex setup. And then if you can avoid custom CI pipelines, that's less code to maintain, especially because most CI these days is written in YAML. I hate YAML particularly, so whenever I can avoid YAML, I'll avoid YAML. And finally, Terraform is too complex for developers usually, even though, okay, we talk about DevOps all the time, but still, let's just admit it, it's just too complex for developers to know whatever they need to know about application logic, business logic, their technologies, plus all the infrastructure. It's difficult, which is why it's important to have a platform, have good abstractions, as Manuel was saying the other day, compartmentalize those things, but still have things, teams own them. And one way to do this is to create this abstraction layer for developers, embed an SRE in the team. This is something that usually works pretty well, is having an SRE work with the dev team to explain how the infrastructure works, to sit down with them and say, hey, what is it that you need? Let's sit down, let's get it done. Because if you need to open tickets, just terrible idea. So this enables you to have these multiple environments. Okay, if you don't have this person, if you don't have this abstraction layer, these are probably not going to happen. Next thing, having a resource pool, because this is expensive. Many people will come to me and they say, oh, but it's going to be just too expensive. It's going to be, thousands and thousands of dollars. Sure, if you're trying to replicate production exactly as it is now, it will probably be expensive. One way to do this, Manny was just talking earlier about having budgets. So in my particular experience, budgets, they work well when it's easy to escalate if you do go above budget. The problem I've seen is not when people have to go above budget, is when people are under budget and they have to ask someone to spend $50. That's very, very bad. So do you have something that you can use to set budgets? Kubesphere is quite easy to use. And now the big theme, how similar to production should it be? And now everyone's going to say, as similar as possible. But I don't necessarily agree. The problem is, no matter how similar to production you make your staging environment, you're going to still have bugs there. People are still going to use it in ways you didn't intend them to use it. I've seen people trying to do things like, oh, let's just mirror all the traffic we get in production to staging, and then we're going to catch all the bugs. Cool idea. They're going to get lots of traffic and all that. Problem is, it's probably a lot of traffic. You're going to spend twice as much. Not as practical. Maybe if you're a small startup, if you don't have as much traffic, maybe that's good, but as a startup, you want to grow. And then if you grow and you cannot do this, what's the point? The other thing is, sure, you have two environments. Maybe let's just mirror part of the traffic. Still good, but still not all the traffic. You're not going to catch all the problems. Now, let's say you have a lot of money. You can mirror everything. People in your team, they're going to use one environment, only staging and not production. And now you have to mirror staging to production as well. Terrible idea. So what I'd say you should do is try to have different levels of equivalence, kind of like the pyramid of testing, but for pre-production. So for development, you just need some functional equivalence. You just need to make it work. You just need to have whatever services that you need to develop running. You don't need to run everything. Validation, it's usually good to have some kind of performance equivalence. So if you run, I don't know, a bazillion replicas of something, just run one in pre-production. It's going to work fine for one person. It's probably okay. Testing, same thing. You should probably have an equivalent infrastructure in a way. So if you have Kafka, use Kafka. If you have, I don't know, queues, database of whatever kind, use them. It doesn't need to be the exact same size of production, but you need to use the same pieces of software. So that's why I'd say, sure, if you use, let's say, DynamoDB, don't try to just create a beautiful interface and use, I don't know, MongoDB locally. It's probably going to be different. It's probably not going to work. So don't worry too much about making it too similar to production. There's a few other ways to handle those problems, which we'll talk about later. But making it exactly like production is not going to solve all of your problems. If anything, it might add more and more problems if you try to make it exactly like production. Sure, it can be similar. It probably should be similar. but you should think about how much similarity you really need. Automating sieging and using clean slate, this is very important. As we've talked before, you should really, really put some effort into having anonymized data here that resembles production, so you can actually test migrations, catch cases where in which things go wrong, and it's not too difficult to do. You know, you can use Faker to anonymize some data, even to generate some fake data based on whatever database roles you want. If you want to start a really cool startup in the AI world, probably creating some GPT thing which generates fake data based on your roles specification. That would probably be cool. You'd probably make some money. Empowering non-technical users, again, have these people participate on our review process. If you do have critical things that you need to put in these environments, put them behind auth. Just put some SSO in front of it. Have some observability as well. Set up Prometheus. Get some alerts when things go wrong. Because let's say a QA tested something, it looks like it works for them, but it generates some crazy bug in the back end that breaks something else that no one has seen. If you have these alerts, they're going to help you a lot. So the people I've seen implementing things like this in-house, the ones that get the most value out of it are the ones that can get alerts and logs from pre-production, so it's pretty cool. Then run some synthetics and E3 tests against those environments before you merge. This is, again, a common problem. You know, people have these entrant tests that keep running against staging that they run manually, or they don't even run, they only run it on their machines. If you have one pre-production environment per pull request, all of a sudden, you get a free environment to do entrant tests. And you can use the same tools you've built before if you need to parallelize them or something. So that's pretty cool. And feature flagging. Because even though you have these, maybe you can enable all the feature flags there so these folks can see it, but you don't necessarily want to ship something to production. So feature flagging is also, again, another critical thing for you to be able to ship to pre-production. So that's pretty much it. We're almost at the end, but I just want to highlight how important it is that you don't try to make these exactly like production. So you're never going to catch all the bugs. It's going to be really, really, really expensive for you to make this exactly like production. So things I'd invest a lot of money in are observability and making sure you have automated tests, metrics, alerts, and all that in pre-production. And your software needs to be designed so it fails gracefully. It fails, it breaks, you can get away with that. Because you're never going to get away with having bugs in production. These pre-production environments, they're great for many things, including catching bugs. Not shipping bugs is great. You can save some money. And sometimes you're going to catch some pretty dire things in pre-production. But invest a lot of effort as well into post-production, into post-deployment, because these things that you did before, sure, they help a lot with bugs. They help a lot, especially with non-technical requirements and with enabling your team to get to production faster. But once it's in production, you cannot guarantee it's going to be bug-free. So just to summarize, first thing, use on-demand environments, not just one. Empower developers to spin up their own environments. Manage resources on a team basis and make it easy for them to escalate. Please, please, please do not say your budget is $500 and once you used it, it's done. No. Make it easy for them to escalate, but enable them. Make them powerful. Make them able to just use whatever budget they have to whatever they think is important, because the teams themselves, they know whatever they need. Cool? Use fresh copies of data for each environment. Make pre-production environments observable. Run periodic tests against these environments. So these are called synthetics tests, if you want to Google it later. Then use different profiles for pre-production, so lightweight versus heavyweight, depending on how much similarities you need. Because let's say you're running load testing. Sure, if you're running load testing, you should probably try to replicate production, because, well, you're going to have some advantage, doing that. And probably, if you're doing load testing, you'll probably get more traffic than you usually get in production, especially if you're a startup, right? And finally, do not allow pre-production to become a bottleneck. So that's pretty much it. I think we have around 10 minutes for questions. But if you do want to chat, I'll be around later. You can also send me an email at any time. We're also at ergomake.dev. Happy to help anyone with their particular setups. But that's pretty much it. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Lucas.
Cool,
Thank you
thank
so
you.
much. We have some time for some questions, and they're coming through on Slido right now.
Awesome.
And ladies and gentlemen, if you have any questions for Lucas, Slido is operational, so get your questions in there.
Let's have a look.
And let's take a look at what they've got for you.
I saw some people nodding, which was a great sign when I was talking about the problems, so really excited.
I know that there's one question about the slides. Are your slides available for people? Would you be so kind to give them the slides, or are those?
Yeah, I can definitely put them
Yeah?
up. Yeah, I'll put them up. I'm on Twitter at @TheWizardLucas, so I'll tweet out the link to the slides once I put them up. Sure.
Okay, that would be great. That was one of the questions that I know came through on Slido.
Cool.
And we're just connecting here, I see now. And does anyone in the audience have a question? We have a handheld mic here. We can bring it out to you if something comes to mind. We seem to be having a slight issue with Slido at the moment, so perhaps if you asked your question on Slido, you could repeat it into the microphone. Here we go. Thank you, sir.
Cool. One of the people that were nodding. Nice. Thank you.
Thank you. Sorry, so I just wanted to ask, it's a great presentation, and I also face this problem. We've been building this in-house for other companies, indeed, very similar solutions. I checked the ergomake, it's really nice. One question that we had, so for example, if you have like kinesis streams or something similar, it's particularly expensive because it's on a per shard basis, and
Yeah.
if you tend to create a lot of them, then you tend to end up paying quite a lot of money. How would you replicate? Like, we've been testing with local stack quite heavily on the development machines, but at the end of the day, there are a couple differences even in behavior. So at that point, does it still make sense to do this, or how would you get around this kind of issue?
Yeah. If it's too expensive, I would try to find an alternative. So if it's too expensive and your goal is just to enable these folks, these non-technical folks, to test it, I would probably find a way to mock it somehow, or to downgrade it in such a way that it becomes not expensive. So sure, let's say if you have some kind of cloud resource that it gets very expensive, lots of people use. Sure, you probably shouldn't use the exact same settings. Maybe you can downgrade it. Maybe you can find a way to get around it. I would probably not try to use the exact same setup you have in production. We've seen people doing lots of things serverless, and this is a common problem they face, because if they just use serverless all the time, sometimes there's some pretty expensive things. They don't try to replicate it exactly like it is. They use some mock that's sufficiently valid, because even if it's not the exact same thing, again, what you want is deploy production, have observability, and catch those problems there, but enable the non-technical folks to use it and see like, okay, if it's similar enough, and then especially visually and behaviorally, most of the time, it's probably fine. But I wouldn't try to replicate it exactly like it is in production.
Thank you very much.
Cool, thanks.
Any other questions from the floor? We still have a couple of minutes. Oh, we have one right here in the front.
Hello, I just wanted to ask that, what do you think, based on your experience, the staging environment should be accessible by the client?
Sorry, can you repeat the last part?
Yeah, so what do you think, the staging or pre-production environment should be accessible by the client, like a beta environment, or it should be used by internally?
So it really depends on your use case. I haven't seen many people making them available to customers. Sometimes if people are working with design partners, like sometimes startups, they sign up some people for free in exchange for feedback. You may want to share with them, but even in that case, it's easier to just feature flag it. So this is exactly the case in which I would recommend feature flagging instead of actually doing this. Cool?
Here, question here.
Hey, thank you for the talk.
Thank you.
I've been a huge fan of developer environments, either personal and team and stages of pre-production deployment. I'm kind of curious from your experience, like how many people here use personal developer environments or team environments? Yeah, I'm just curious.
That's a great question. Can we get hands up if you do use those? Cool. I'd love to know what you're using after that. That's a great question. Yeah, but it's not as common these days. I'd expect that by now, with services getting larger and internet getting better, that you'd have more of these environments in the cloud. But it seems like folks still want to get a lot of control, and you can have all the control you want, run your own tools. If you're not using, let's say, Gitbot or whatever, and still have these and only run your application on the cloud. So So yeah, I wonder why more people are not using those yet.
Lucas, we have time for one question.
Okay, let's do that.
And you can choose which one you think is the winner here for you.
Okay, so we answered the first one there from my friend there. The slides, you manage syncs to the main. Okay, I thought I heard you manage syncs to mainline on each development environment. Why? How do you prevent merge conflict? So that's not exactly it. So what I mentioned is some folks, they have a bot which goes PR from PR to PR, automatically rebasing on main. And because these environments are integrated with GitHub or GitLab or whatever, when they rebase, your environment automatically gets the changes there. So whatever people are testing is going to have whatever the changes are there. So if you have feature A, which is kind of like synergistic with feature B, if you have your bot updating it, people that are going to use your environment, they can see both your feature and the other feature which is synergistic with it. So that's why I mentioned you cannot fully prevent conflicts also because sometimes they're just going to be code conflicts and unless you're using AI and doing something fancy, you're not going to be able to solve them.
All right.
Cool.
Big round of applause
Thank
for
you,
Lucas.
everyone.